I think something like three. I just did a big talk to the auto industry, the legacy auto industry down in San Diego about 2 months ago. And I heard something like $350 billion went into is shifted in the last year towards really fundamentally revamping the entire global auto industry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CleanTechies Podcast. This is episode 58 of the show. I am your host, Silas Maynor, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to bring you this show as always, and very thankful to you for tuning in. If it's your first time listening, please subscribe if you enjoy today's content. This episode is a special one that I'm actually very, very excited to be able to share with you. Today, I have the honor of bringing you a conversation with Peter Leyden, who has spent his career figuring out the future in general. He started his career in journalism and then went on to become, I would say, arguably one of the most influential thinkers about the future in the world, especially currently making a lot of waves talking about the future of America in general. And just really, really powerful speaker, does a lot of things globally, so very excited to be able to bring him to the show. In today's conversation, we focused on and covered a lot of different things, but generally speaking, focused on the future of clean energy and how we know it has arrived, as well as what the circular economy really is going to be. And then we also, of course, touched on the future kind of shifting patterns of consumers and how that's going to drive things inside of the climate tech and clean tech space. Generally speaking, Peter has a lot of very fascinating points of view, things that really, I think, just open people's mind to what's outside the box. People usually are kind of thinking within certain frameworks that we have now, and this conversation and his writings as well have really helped me to try to think and challenge kind of what is the box, right? What is the scope that we can think inside of? So I think you'll enjoy this conversation. I really hope you do at least. So definitely, please, feel free to let us know any comments or feedback. Reach out to us on Twitter. But before we do get into the show, of course, want to make special thanks to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. As always, NextWave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across climate tech, renewables, ESG, and the sustainability space globally. So if your team is growing or you're looking to make a career change, please do consider reaching out to NextWave. You can do that through their website at next-wavepartners.com. So without any further delay, let's get into the show. All right, welcome to the show, Peter. How are you doing today?
I am doing great and looking forward to this.
Absolutely, same here. So I guess just to set things up, so maybe some people might not be familiar with your background. So before we get into things, I would be keen if you want to just kind of give us a quick summary of your experiences, what you're doing now, and kind of how did you end up doing what you're doing?
Okay, well, started my career as a journalist, including a segment of being a foreign correspondent. I was in Asia working for Newsweek, but came back with the very early kind of tech story of the internet and the web. And I worked with the founders at Wired magazine in San Francisco. So that's when I came out here. And Wired at that time was not just about, it was driven by a lot of new technologies, but it also had a bigger frame on the future and many different pieces, including energy. And so I was part of that crew. I ended up running that thing in the heyday in the 90s. And then I rolled into more kind of futures work, what you'd call strategic foresight work. Worked with one of the premier firms, you could say at the time, with a legendary guy named Stuart Brand, for those that might know about Stuart. And learned the business, essentially strategic foresight. And so I spent a lot of time thinking systematically about the future, including learning, scenario planning and all kinds of things that help you think more systematically with data and all kinds of stuff about the future. Written a couple books in the future, done a ton of keynote speaking around America and also in Europe, advising a lot of kind of companies, particularly C-suites or senior exec things now through my own company called Reinvent Futures. And I have been always into the big picture story every time and what's coming in the next 10 to 30 years. And with that frame, of course, I've been thinking a ton about climate change. My recent work of the last several years has been pretty much primarily organized around how the hell are humans ever going to pull off this transition of getting a handle on global warming and actually adapting to climate change. So I'm the big picture guy. Looking forward to talking with you about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing before we get into maybe more of the technical items here in general, I'm curious, I guess, from my perspective, I'm somebody who also really likes looking towards the future, very optimistic type of person. I'm curious, how did you kind of develop this mentality, especially for people unfamiliar with your works? You do a lot of work where you kind of look back as if you're writing it from the future,
Yep.
and talk about it as if it's a history lesson. How did you
Yep.
develop that mentality, and how could I, somebody like myself, develop that mentality as well to kind of take that view of things?
Well, that's a good point of view. So what I have learned is that the things that really matter in what's going around us right now are really best understood as what will people in the future, when they look back on this time, what will they see as the really significant developments? And too often today, and people, your listeners and all that, are caught up in is like, what is it? Is, stock market up? Is stock market down? Is it tweet this, tweet that? Oh, who's up, who's down in politics? It's always breaking news. It's always something crazy. And you start to think, you're just so caught up in the immediate, what's going on. And a lot of people are trying to push that. A lot of people are trying to understand what that's going on. But I have always found, as a journalist from the beginning, but certainly in the last 25 years, and as someone think about the future, is if you just step back and you think, okay, what's really going on here in the world right now? What are the through lines that make the most sense? What would someone in 50 years or so, when they look back at this, the way we would look back, let's say we look back in 1980, or we look back on the 60s, or, when you look back at those times, you didn't get into, okay, the ups and downs of how you got the civil rights, development, bill through Congress that was CM on or Manchin on, or you just look at, oh man, they passed this incredible thing of all these big bills that got, voting rights and civil rights through, and you just see the big picture, what's happening, and then you move on to this. Oh, and there was this Vietnam War, and there was this or that. I mean, there's basically, you look back on these things that we think of it as what really mattered. And I think what's refreshing is when you think about our time now, think about that. And so I have found as a way to communicate that through article. I've done newspaper, I've done weekly magazines, I've done monthly magazines, I've done books, a couple of books on my own. I found that technique really works. And so what I've used is adopted that. I had a very famous, kind of a iconic cover story at Wired in the mid 90s called The Long Boom. I did it with another, actually a scenario planner, a world famous scenario planner, Peter Schwartz. And the two of us literally told the story of the future of the world by telling the story of the world, America and the world, from 1980 to 2020. And we wrote this in, let's say, the mid 90s. So it was essentially 25 years in the future, but we told it as all it all happened. And we were just, this story to the future was just writing back, oh, wasn't that interesting? And, 2010, we had this or that and going on. And it was extremely interesting, provocative article at the time. It later went into a book that went into multiple languages. I ended up speaking around that for a decade almost. Because it was so powerful, because what it was happening in the mid 90s is people didn't understand how the digital economy was going to grow and fill out, how these goofy startups with names like Amazon, what's an Amazon, how is that going to ever, amount to anything, let alone running the whole global economy kind of thing. They didn't understand how globalization was going to kind of knit together the world, and China was going to rise, and what would that mean if they ever became a superpower. And so we laid out that story just as though it happened. And at the time, people just it was like a shock of recognition to people. There was enough people who were kind of starting to feel that story happening, but they couldn't really see it. And all of a sudden, when we laid it out there, it just snapped into crystallization of like, wow, maybe they're right. Actually, this could actually be this, what we called the long boom, a long tech boom, a long economic boom globally. And also, in effect, it became a stock boom too. The Dow, just for when we wrote this story, the Dow was at 5,000 and later, ended up in 2020 at 30,000. I mean, there's or put it the other way, Apple Computer was dead broke when our story came out, and they later became the first $1 trillion company, and they hit 3 trillion at the beginning of this year, right? I mean, these things at the time were seen as preposterous, but when we laid them out as like, hey, this happened, it made people at least think, hey, what happens if this happens? Now, just to keep that same frame, you're kind of making an illusion here for people who haven't followed my work. Recently, in the year 2020, once that kind of end run of that story had kind of finished, the book story and also the cover story in Wired, I did another body of work called The Transformation, kind of the follow-up to this, like a sequel of The Long Boom. And it actually looked out to the year 2050 and was a story told from the year 2100. Think about that, the end of this century, 2100. A Gen Z person, probably your listeners out there has got to be Gen Zers, who are going to live for sure. Most of them will live to 2100. So that person was just looking back towards the end of his life, seeing what happened from 2020 to 2050, which is our next 30 years. And that piece has also driven a bunch of interest around that. And I've done talks on that. I've been doing a bunch of things around that. And I'm actually doing a new piece on that coming up right now. So anyhow, there's this technique that is just a helpful way to get what's really important in what's going on, and also to give people a sense of how things could emerge in the future. It's very hard for people to see the future. It's very hard for people to understand how things would work when it hasn't quite been fully done. And so it sometimes paints the story by looking back. You can, from the future, it finally makes sense to people like, I get how that could work. And so in the transformation, we solve climate change. I mean, we're never going to solve it, so it's perfectly solved. But the shorthand is solve climate change, which is we do get a handle on stopping global warming, and we do adapt to climate change, and we do make this transition to clean energies. And that story is a story I've been telling in these pieces. It's in Medium, a 6-part series, and also in my keynote talks and various things you can see on my websites and things I do all the time.
Yeah, I think it's quite powerful, to be honest, because, I think perhaps yourself and myself probably are similar, that we do look towards the future, but I've realized that there's a lot of people who have a hard time visualizing the future. So when you tell it from a historical standpoint, it's easier to comprehend. And I also found it quite interesting. I didn't quite finish your book. I got about 50 pages left on the long boom. Didn't quite get through it, but
which is an older book.
Yeah,
it was 20 years old now.
98 was when it was first published.
The first version, but if you, I don't know.
Yeah, I have the later version. I think it was
probably paperback was like 2000.
2000.
Yeah. So think of it as 20 years ago. 20
yeah. So for me, it was very interesting because obviously it was written from a perspective of where the world was basically around the time I was born, right? So for me,
exactly.
For me, it was really interesting because a lot of these things I take for granted, right? Because you mentioned, like, to people at Amazon at one point was kind of this odd idea, right? And for me, it's like I've never really known anything else. So it was really helpful for me to think in a perspective of massive change happening, because then you can kind of, for myself, look forward to that. So it's very, very interesting for me.
I like it, yeah.
So yeah, let's kind of move into then the major topics here. I think just to kind of set things up, we will try to focus on the future of clean energy generally, kind of where things are going and what the indicators are. And then the same thing as to where's it going and what are the indicators for the circular economy. And if we have time, wouldn't mind diving into kind of consumer behaviors or anything that you're seeing there that are helping drive corporations to make this cleaner future. So let's start with, first of all, clean energy. I guess the big item is kind of from your perspective, how do you know that clean energy is the future, and what are the indicators? Especially, I think it's relevant right now when we talk about energy independence, right? A lot of people are debating, is it worth it? Do we spend the time to continue on the renewable space, or should we do some short-term items with oil and gas or fracking, for example? So I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, what are those indicators showing that we're going towards it?
Well, I do think this is a huge piece of what's happening right now. Is, in my mind, that was in debate. Let's say, think of it this way. There was a critical uncertainty in the last decade. Let's say if you go back again, thinking from the big picture, from 2010 to 2020, in that period, what we call in the futures business, a critical uncertainty is, would the world start tipping towards and scaling around renewable energies like solar, like wind? And also, would the world of electric mobility, electric vehicles really tip or not? Now, if you started in 2010 or even 2015 even, it was a serious debate. And in fact, if anything, you're a betting person, you'd say, nah, it's not going to take off. It hadn't taken off for the last 30 years. It's not going to happen again. But what has happened is that has tipped, in my opinion. And let me talk about how this works. One of the things that is instructive of having gone through the digital technology boom, the digital transformation that really started it depends when you start, but let's just say in the mid 90s till 2020, we had a 25-year tech boom around digital technologies. Now, it sounds obvious, but like you say, you were born. I mean, when I was at Wired, people thought we were crazy that people would put their credit cards on the internet. People didn't even, who in their right mind will do that? Let alone hey, we're going to have digital commerce. That's essentially, we're going to have, be selling everything online, and ultimately these companies will be trillion-dollar companies. And that was like preposterous. They're like, what are you talking about? It's insane. Anyhow, there was a bunch of these frameworks that it's hard to remember how fast this happened. But one of the things that happens in technologies, there's a technology adoption curve kind of thing that's well understood in Silicon Valley and all places around that I spend time in. And it comes to, when is the tipping point of a technology? Not every single technology that gets fully adopted goes through the same, early innovators and early adopters and early majority, then late majority, then laggards, and basically it goes through. Now, not every technology becomes successful. So, but the ones that do always go through this thing. And the beginning years are so small, and they're ramping up a little bit, and there's little incremental improvements, and the early adopters have to pay a lot more, and they're spending way much more money. But then there becomes a tipping point where all of a sudden the price points come down to a point where, holy shit, it's cheaper than, let's say, the traditional alternative. And it starts to be widespread enough where enough people see it to see the advantages, that it just starts to shift dramatically. And that's when you see these upwards curves, the hockey stick stuff going on. And again, this happens with everything. It's happened with cell phones, TVs, you name it. It's everything goes through this thing. So once you understand that thing, you could apply that essentially to clean energies. And what we were watching the cost of, solar cells coming down on the same kind of cost curves that was happening around digital technology. We saw, and I lay this out, by the way, when I do talks, I do all kinds of data on this and show it. And it's very convincing when you see it visually, like, oh shit, this is exactly what happened with digital technologies. But anyhow, what happened is the cost came down with, let's say, solar panels would be one. The adoption got to a point where, holy shit, this is really starting to scale. Then it started to take off. Then it went into logarithmic growth, which is essentially doubling every several years, which is what started to happen, which drives even more costs, drives it down. And so pretty soon it gets cheaper than the alternative carbon energy. And in many places like California and other places, other parts of the world, even, it's even getting to that point. And then it just takes off. And then everything tips. Then it's what they call a paradigm shift. The mentality goes from like, oh, it'll never happen, to, holy shit, it's the future. And then everything starts to shift. And so global finance starts to say, holy shit, maybe, those investments in oil fields in, whatever, Nigeria, not the rest thing. Maybe I should be putting it into kind of, scaling up, solar panels and wherever. And it starts to move in a big way. And so in my estimation, that is completely and utterly happened around alternative renewable, certainly in solar, and to a certain extent with wind. Wind doesn't have the same exponential gains in some respects because it doesn't have the same cost savings in the way that you have had with solar. But anyhow, that thing is happening. That has tipped. That is moving, and the money's moving there. The same thing, roughly, if you go back to 2010 around electric vehicles, and you sat there and said, was it ever going to take off? I don't know. GM's been talking about electric cars forever. People have been talking about it. A lot of people, basically in the mid-90s, we were talking about hydrogen fuel cell cars. We thought that was going to supersede the internal combustion engine. But let's say, so in early 2010, even 2015, there's this goofy company called Tesla, but what the hell were they? It's all these super high-end roadsters. It'll never happen. Anyhow, that is tipped too. And it is tipped in a way that is less controversial because it is tipped so dramatically that every single legacy car company in the freaking world now has completely shifted their strategy. They're retooling everything. I think something like I just did a big talk to the auto industry, the legacy auto industry down in San Diego about 2 months ago. And I heard something like $350 billion is shifted in the last year towards really fundamentally revamping the entire global auto industry. And the adoption rates have been going up the tree. 20% of new cars in China are now there, basically about 10% in Europe. Places like, Norway has got like 90% of the new cars are going that way. Even in the US, it's now hit 5%. And 5% of new car sales now hitting electric vehicles in the United States is very significant, because in that adoption curve world, once the technology gets into about 5% of the new sales, it starts getting into its tipping territory. And so it's hitting that now in the US. And now you're watching how out of Washington, all the stuff, we're trying to figure out how do we get all the charging stations. It's gone. It's just basic global finance, the industry. It's over. That's not even a debate anymore. It's not really debating that. It's gone. Now, so that is why it's fascinating to watch this and be part of this, because I remembered what happened, in the mid-90s when it started to tip like that, or even late 90s, it started really tipping. people still didn't understand how would that digital economy work. Well, they're the same thing. I was just down there with all these legacy auto companies. They're all trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do with the dealerships, and how are we going to charge these things? And well, will people? They had a million questions, and it was kind of exciting because, and I was trying to tell them with this lesson. I said, dudes, it's gonna, once you send a signal out like that, once you put a clear signal that this is the future, money's moving there, everybody's going there, boom, then it's just this crazy, this is where capitalism really works. It just sends a new signal out. It's like the new North Star. They all start to like figuring out how to make money in that world now. And you don't have to like plan it. You don't have to have the government figure everything out. No, it's just this crazy mosh pit of innovation. So when they were saying, well, how are we going to know we can charge cars on the freeways in the next 5 years? I say, well, you don't have to know exactly how that's going to happen. I'm telling you, someone's going to figure that out. And there'll probably be 5 different ways to try to do it. And then, once it'll end up with 1 or 2 options, and that'll work. So it's just kind of, we've been there a million times in these situations. And it's with that perspective, that historical perspective, oh, that's how this works. You can see what's happening around us today. And you can see that whole thing clicking in a big way. And that's why I'm really excited. And that's why a lot of people who know the most about climate and clean tech and stuff, like yourself, and probably a lot of people listening here, far from a depressing thing and everyone kind of bummed out, and it's like, oh my God, we're going to, this is the general zeitgeist of average people trying to bum out about the clean tech and about the climate change. But honestly, people who know what's going on, is like, holy shit, this is like, we're in this crazy historical boom. It's like, if you can't make money in this kind of environment, then give up, because it's going to be an amazing next 25 years. I mean, it's going to take literally 25 years to scale the whole industry, but it's happening.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's very interesting. Obviously, from my perspective, it's that everything. The reason I became so fascinated by the fact that we have to solve climate change is that literally everything we do is going to be reinvented, from the materials of everything. Yeah. Right, materials engineering is probably a really good education to get right now. But I wanted to maybe ask you, because you talked about specifically with EVs, and this is something that has come up with a lot of people I kind of talk with, is the different parts falling into place as EVs hit the road. So do you have certain indicators? Because I know obviously you do a lot of this future work and kind of looking back at what might happen and follow. Do you have ideas of some of the ways that these things will be solved, and some of the ways, maybe not be solved per se, but some of the ways that will probably completely view things differently? Because as I mentioned, maybe a little, I think I might have glossed over it a bit in the beginning, but I was curious to understand your mentality of how you don't let your past knowledge and your past ideas kind of prevent your future thinking from going outside of the box. Yeah. Similar to the same way with like technology adoption, right? Starting with something, and instead of making incremental improvements, completely shifting the way we look at it. So are there any areas within specifically EV you think that those things are going to shift over the coming years?
Yes. Now, and I'll even crib on kind of what I was telling these. I mean, these were like the legacy companies I was talking to, not all of them, but many of them. In this audience I was talking to at the private kind of conference, but I'm happy to talk about it. I think what's going to be fascinating about EVs is autonomous vehicles. And the reason is there is a kind of a multiple pileup of disasters that not just America's running into, but basically all the developed world, actually the whole world. And that basic disaster is, there's like, everybody wants to live in cities and everyone's piling into cities. You can't, there's no affordable housing anywhere, basically. I mean, it's bad. I'm here in San Francisco, the Bay Area, of course, it's notoriously expensive, but it's now getting to be like this in every place, all these major cities, all throughout the US, and that's happening all over Europe. I mean, it's the same thing, and it's happening all over Asia. It's like, the Asia is even worse. There's like 20 million people in these cities. Anyhow, the point is, we have a structural problem that's even just around how do you organize people in cities for affordable housing that can live on decent wages that work in the long time. It's a sustainable housing issue. It coincides with a total reinvention of electric mobility and transportation. And the one thing that's really key to this is that if you had autonomous vehicles, which, by the way, are here in San Francisco, you can already get autonomous taxi. I mean, it'll pick you up now. I mean, there are not many of them, and you have to kind of, it's not ubiquitous yet, but it's legal and happening, and it's happening in Arizona. And anyhow, this is starting to happen, right? So we can get into that if you want to go into that. But let's just put it this way. If you had the ability to have autonomous vehicles, which could be running 24/7, 7 days a week, charging periodically kind of thing, that could be shared, you could claw back about a third of all cities is essentially real estate devoted to empty car spaces, whether it's parking decks downtown, whether it's parking around malls, the whole parking lots, whether it's on your driveway of all these single family homes, or whether it's it's just we've got these individual cars that are literally sit dormant 95% of the time. You use them like 5% of their life. You use them, and everyone has one. In fact, most families have 2 or 3 of them. It's like that was a great idea for the 20th century, at least for America in the 20th century, when we had the land and the population wasn't jammed into cities and blah blah blah, all the ways we dealt with it. But but now you think, holy shit, if we could take back a third of all that land and we could actually build housing, and so it's not just tight housing and super expensive housing, but it's like abundant housing, and the prices come down, it's cheap, relatively cheap, certainly relatively not. Or and you started to get a different way of how people get around. You don't need all these giant freeways and just channeling in all these individuals all the time. And then there's the remote work thing and virtual. There's a bunch of things that are coming together right now that I would argue that in the next 25 years we're going to actually reinvent cities essentially. And a big component of that is going to be the transportation system around that and the housing around that. And that is going to be what's happening. And so what I'm saying is, if you think about it that way, about the future dramatically different than the past, like, oh, we mean not everyone's going to need a car. Oh, let alone every family, you have 2 or 3. And, oh, we don't need all this space like that. It completely changes how it's going on. And now, if this was complete sci-fi and like, oh yeah, someday we'll all have flying cars, I mean, that's too far in the future. But what we're at now is a cusp where, holy shit, this is actually possible now. And it's actually happening. Now, will it happen this decade in terms of the full autonomous thing? It's not the same level as the EV thing. The EV thing is taken off now. It's not quite taken off at that level. It might take another 10 years, or let's say 2030 or something, where it starts to really scale. But that said, is the long view of reinventing the system starts to really open up really different possibilities. And so I laid this out to all these legacy auto people, and kind of freaks them out a little bit, because they're used to selling a shitload of cars to all these individuals, and every 3 years you get a new lease, and that's how they make money. And then they love the mechanical engines where you have to get the oil changes, and you need these mechanics doing it, and blah blah blah. Anyhow, they pad out those things. Anyhow, that's gone. I mean, that's going to be gone, right? And so these electrics, by the way, I have a Tesla. I've been having electrics forever here. I've been early. I'm that kind of innovator, early adopter. Got my wife nuts. I'm always the first guy and spending through the nose on it. But the point being is, they're awesome cars. There's no maintenance. There's all kinds of stuff. So anyhow, the point is, you asked kind of the reframing of the future. Is I think the actual changes in electric mobility is going to be beyond just the electric propulsion of it. It's going to, combined with essentially AI and robotics, is going to essentially be a different way of transportation. And because of that, you can do sharing, you can do all kinds of stuff that we haven't been able to do today, because we didn't know how to do it for the last 100 years.
Yeah, I think that's quite fascinating. That's something I've been really fascinated about, by public transport, coming from like the middle of nowhere, and moving to New York, and having actually just come back from Singapore, seeing a very, very successful public transportation system. I've always wondered how we can get there, and I tend to be skeptical on that one, because I think it's part of the American fabric to own a vehicle, but I do think that will change at some point.
Well, I would say this, there'll be still, all these transitions have a long, tail. I mean, it'll be decades of people still having, but you'll maybe have one car rather than 3 cars in a house.
Correct.
And the other thing about it is, I will say, in your generation, not knowing exactly how old you are, but you alluded to it, Gen Zs and millennials, they already, because of apps and Uber and Lyft and all that kind of stuff, I mean, they're very much used to sharing stuff and stuff too. So I think there's a generational shift here. You were talking about a little bit later, we can talk about the consumer shifts. But essentially, it's a generational shift here that essentially you got to project what are those sensibilities, those personalities going to want to do with this stuff. And by the way, the whole the whole auto industry is still controlled by boomers and, maybe the front edge Gen Xers a little bit, but nobody in that generation is buying anything. Like the boomers are just retiring and dying off. I mean, so who cares what they want to do with the car? It's going to be who's going to buy the car in those the big generations coming up the pipeline who are buying shit, having families, buying houses, buying cars, whatever it is. And so I think that's the secret sauce, is overlaying that consumer shifting, what's that generation want, with the pressures of climate and with the state of our innovation, of our technology. Where are we and what's possible? That is one of the things I'll say in the big picture. You always got to look at an era's fundamental technologies. You could say science and technologies, and say, what is it possible to do in that time? And because if it's possible to do, humans are going to pretty much find a way to do something with it. And so that is the key. And it's like, we now know how to do these clean energies. Oh, we now know how to do autonomous vehicles. Oh, we now knew. You start to think, okay, well, what will humans do with that? Well, clear out of the way, because humans are like infinitely ingenious. They will figure out a million ways to do a million things. And so don't think they're always going to do what you did before, because that's not how people work. They work into like, holy shit, what can I do with this thing? Oh my God, I can do this thing I could never do before. Boom, let's do it. And that's what happens.
Yeah, I think
again and again and again. It just happens all the time.
I think it's a very fair point. Obviously, I forget to think about that. I did spend some time in insurance before I moved into this career, and we talked about the futures kind of at the financial markets because of the generational shifting, right? And I think it obviously would be the same thing with, obviously most people in my generation are, again, familiar with the idea of sharing, where our parents would probably say, why would you share an apartment with some random person in New York that you never met, right? Where it's like totally normal to us, right? To do these things. Right. So that is a good point. I appreciate that. One thing I just wanted to get a quick comment on that you mentioned earlier was this 5% kind of adoption inflection point. And obviously there's a bit of news recently with the possibility of kind of the slimmed down Build Back Better bill that has come through. And I think that I was hearing some debate about it on the All In podcast on whether or not government spending should continue to offer subsidies for things like that, like clean energy and EVs, when there's clear reasons, as you've mentioned, kind of alluded to, such as maintenance and cost and lifetime cost of ownership with EVs in particular. Do you think that in the long boom of transitioning to a cleaner future, it makes sense for governments to continue having subsidies to continue the adoption once we've reached that inflection point? Or does it make more sense to have some of that money going towards additional research? Because obviously research oftentimes comes from governments, right, in order to advance these technologies. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, to me, we're still, okay, good point. And I like that. I would say, to solve climate change, and this is, to solve climate change, you need to make energy cheap. That's the key thing. It's not about, you can get more and more subsidies, or you can, more and more ways to kind of fund it from the government or whatever. That's not the answer in the end. In the end, you need to make renewable energy or clean energy, just clean energy, broadly speaking, because frankly, this also gets into other kinds of energy besides renewables. You got to make energy cheap. Now, luckily for us, we are doing that with a bunch of different energy sources. In fact, there's more to come, which we could potentially get into. But so that's the key piece. Now, the question is, where is the role of government? I do believe in very vigorous government, usefulness of government, but strategically, not to keep doing this way beyond the point you need to do it. I personally don't think we're there yet in terms of the takeoff. As much as I'm super happy and it's hit that 5% and it's starting to take off, I mean, it's still, if you really look at the whole country and everybody, income levels and stuff, a lot of people need help with this, certainly to kind of open their minds to like, holy shit. And if you took $7,500, $7,500, which is, I think, the rough thing, it's been out here in California forever. And it has been in, federal ways doing that. That's a big incentive, actually. And it really does take the edge off it. And I think, until we're like 10% or, maybe there will be a point where you'd want to pull that thing back and say, it's fine, just let it go. One of the things that they are trying to do is, and I think from my understanding of the bill, you might know it closer than me, but is that they are capping the income levels. So, for example, a guy like me who does make quite a bit of money, I don't need it. I don't need that, and so I shouldn't get it, and that's fine. And they're pretty reasonable. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's something like 130 grand for income for a single person in a 2-income house or something. It's like 250 grand or something. I mean, it's not nothing, but it does top out people at a certain level of like, okay, you don't need that. And so I think that is warranted. I also really believe in advanced research and technology. That is like, there is no other alternative, at least in modern day kind of world, of the kind of level of the government is the only one currently doing the kind of long-term research, except for a handful of like super wealthy tech companies like Google and Amazon and Apple and stuff, which is good. That's good that they're throwing a lot of their income into or their revenues, think of it as, into research. But as a whole, as a society, that is a huge role for the federal government and for that matter, state governments. So more of that is better. But I also think those subsidies help, and I think we're in a place now where it's still just. I mean, I'm sitting here confidently talking to you, but honestly, we could use a super boost. I also would say this decade, this next 10 years, or even through till 2030, which is now ticking away at about 8 years or less now, we need to move fast. And the faster we move, the quicker it works, the better for everybody. It'll energize all these efforts. It'll move global capital. I mean, this thing that's happening with the U.S. right now, because I got a lot of friends who are in big finance and impact investing and all kinds of stuff. That signal from the U.S., I mean, assuming it goes through it, who knows when this project comes out, I hope something gets in church to be to it. But let's assume that goes through. That is the biggest single devotion of any kind of country's, chunk of money towards clean tech or clean climate related investments of any place. Now, China's a little different. So let's put that as a secondary thing, but it's bigger than anything that's happened in any of the countries in Europe, smaller countries. That is a signal to global finance. That is a thing that is essentially a multiplier, because it says, oh, if we put 350 billion, if the U.S. government's putting 350 billion, holy shit. Well, then we got these, portfolios that let's follow that money, because now it's tipping. It's the tipping point, and they realize, oh shit, okay, if that's happening now, if that hadn't happened, which is what we thought a few weeks ago, it's the opposite effect. Like global finance was kind of hesitant, like, holy shit, we thought this was going to be going gangbusters. Now maybe it's going to take longer than we thought, and they're going to hold it back. So this is a kind of where that government money goes, which is strategic money essentially, is huge. And that sends signals. And like I said, the main thing is you want to set new North Stars of where the economy is going, where investment should go, where early adoption could go, where things should scale, where you should reorient your business, all that stuff. We're in the middle of a sea change, an absolute sea change in these North Stars around climate and clean energy. Now, you're talking about climate energy. There's another piece of this which you might want to go into, depending on how much time we got, the other category is, I would say, sustainable everything, which is beyond clean energy. That there's essentially a secondary underappreciated piece of the climate package, not so much this last thing coming out of the US, but the broader story here is that we're going to retool all kinds of things. This is where biotechnology comes in. This is where biological engineering, synthetic biology, all these kind of categories of essentially another whole category of technology is also going through a boom. And that will be synergistic with the clean energy stuff, because it's not just about energy. It's about, we got to live much more sustainably. And we need a lot of, materials, plastics, packaging, all kinds of stuff has to be biodegradable, and has to be all kinds of stuff that's sustainable. So our oceans aren't filled with plastic bottles, for the next 100 years. I mean, there's a bunch of things that are going on. Fortunately, as the guy from the big picture sitting here, that's also booming right now. It's crazy time. Now, it's not quite as fully throated tipped in the way that like just tons of money going into it, but it's actually in the beginnings of another long boom. So you got, just to put it in context here, we're living in the next 25 years here. We are going to have a absolute long boom in all clean technologies, into all kinds of, it's going to impact nuclear. It's going to be drilling down, kind of hydro, anyhow, there's a bunch of technologies around this stuff. But you're also going to get it in biotech, synthetic biology, all these new materials around sustainable everything. And then the third one is you're going to see the next essentially generation of infotech, which is going to be AI. It's going to connect up another 3 billion people on the planet still haven't been on the internet. They're going to be coming out in this decade. Anyhow, so you got an infotech world historical boom. You got a clean energy tech world historical boom, and you got a biotech, synthetic biology world historical boom at the same time right now in the next 25 years. And that makes for what I would call a long boom, an economic boom. And it's really far from going to be like, oh, we're just tepid growth and end of the, we're going to run into recessions and never get out of it. It's like there might be some little messiness in the next 6 months here, but the long-term structural thing that's going to happen in the next 10 years is absolutely a boom.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. From my perspective, if you look at with the adoption of the EVs, right? Once people, because obviously energy is not necessarily something you can, for the average person, you know how it works or you feel it. It's your lights turn on and that's all that you care about. And then there's just speculation. But when you get into an electric vehicle, and I've had the opportunity to drive a Tesla, I was already a big fan, right? But as soon as you got that opportunity, like, holy shit, this is amazing. And when you have that tangible experience, I think that a lot of consumers, because obviously it's not just that when they purchase it, it's when their neighbors purchase it and they get to try it, right? And that tangible experience and realizing that, hey, actually, this new thing is not so bad. I think there's a possibility it's going to help open people's minds up to all of the things that kind of are behind the floodgates waiting to come through that leaders are looking for, but everybody else is skeptical of, right?
So you're totally right. Although I will go this far, is like, you're totally right about the car thing. And everybody who's ever gotten in my car, I got the Model 3 right now, let's just say, but I've had other ones. But it's just the most amazing car ever. I mean, it's just like, it's nothing comparable. And it's not like it's super expensive. It's just, it's in the game of what a lot of people pay for other cars. Anyhow, it's just better on a million ways. It's safer too, by the way. Those batteries, if you get hit from the side or behind, those things don't scrunch. It's safer. It doesn't trip over because of the weight of the batteries. It's like there's no maintenance. It's like it gets updated with new operating systems and new features like every month. It's like your iPhone. It's like, holy shit, like it's like so much better. It's like there's nothing worse about it now, except range anxiety. It's like you got to be able to plug it in, and there is some around that, but that's getting solved. But I want to just push back one bit on the energy thing. This is another thing that's happening out here. Like, and again, I'm just kind of using me as an example, but it's a California thing in many respects. It's like I got on my roof, I got solar panels, right? And I made the investment in that thing, and I got a battery on my side of my house, which is essentially a Tesla battery, and then I got the electric car there. With that initial investment, which, by the way, can get subsidized and all kinds of stuff, you can pay it off over 5 years or something. In my case, I paid for it, but it's a reasonable amount of cost. Anyhow, I have free energy, like free electric energy. My car runs on the sunlight, period. It just comes off the sun to my battery into my car. I haven't paid a dime for electricity for years now. And I also haven't paid anything for fuel for maybe when I'm going on a trip, I got to charge it up, and it's a lot cheaper than gas, by the way, even when you do that. The point is, it's not, the energy is in some ways intangible, but it's actually visceral too. And if you go around in California, it's like everyone has solar, and you start realizing, God, maybe I should get this solar. And then everyone's talking about it. It's like, holy shit, it's like cheap. So I would just say all these things are starting to now manifest themselves in ways that is starting to create its own little, echo chambers, their own little, it's just starting to take off in many, 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 many ways. So I would just say you're right about some of that energy, but some of it's you can look around and it's like, holy shit, why don't I have solar?
Yeah, I think it is that is true. Once you have more proximity to it, it makes it a little bit easier. I know in Wisconsin with a very low sunshine capacity, solar is a lot more rare, but fair enough. Maybe best to shift now a little bit into the circular economy. So what I'd like to do is I've had a lot of people talk about maybe one specific area of the circular economy and kind of recycling everything and reusing things. But could you maybe, from your perspective, paint a picture of what the circular economy could look like from like kind of an optimistic perspective of how life might be over the next 20, 30 years here? and maybe some specific examples of where you think we're going to see massive changes, just to kind of open people's minds up to what exactly is the circular economy and how might it look.
Yeah, I have a characteristically different way of talking about this. I mean, I know when people talk about the circular economy, and your listeners have probably heard how that people talk about that. I think about that in a bigger way, in a bigger picture way. And let me step back on this. And it kind of gets into what I was talking about biotech and synthetic biology. And so let's just step back for a second. It's like for the last 250 years, essentially, we've been running on an operating system of industrial production to create stuff. Anything we use, almost everything, we dig up stuff out of the ground, we smelt it, the metals and that kind of stuff. We throw away a lot of, it belches smoke into the air. We throw away the waste. We pollute the waters. Anyhow, there's this industrial production model that has a ton of waste. It has a ton of energy consumption. And then you create these things that, you throw away, and it fills in land dumps and, the whole thing. And so we that's how we work, right? So people are talking about, hey, how can we build those things so they can, pull them apart in their parts and, you reuse them and stuff like that. That's a healthy way to think about it. But the even trippier way to think about it is we're on the verge of essentially a way of producing things that is fundamentally different from the industrial production. And that's like biological production. And let me give you this sense of what's happening. Is like in just the last 20 years, we cracked the first human genome literally 20 years ago. And now we can, it costs $2 billion, by the way. It took us 15 years and $2 billion. And now it costs $100 to get your genome. It's 1,000. Most people, it takes about 1,000 right now, but it's down. I'm already talking to the people that have got it down to $100. So you can get your entire genome done for $100. Well, basically means it's free. All these viruses that have been going around with the COVID and stuff, we can nail those like in 30 seconds, or not 30 seconds, but 30 minutes. You can kind of crack the latest genome of that thing. We've figured out how to do that, super cheap. We then, with CRISPR, as a way that we've understood how to cheaply and easily manipulate those genes to kind of change them, to nip out genes, to infuse genes, just to kind of bring genes from one organism into another. So we've essentially now got what they call biological engineering. So engineering is not about mechanical parts, it's about living things. So now we have biological engineering. And this leads to what they call synthetic biology. So what is biology? Biology is the living world around us, plants, animals, everything we know, right? We now can synthesize, meaning we get to engineer how those things will grow and how those cells will operate to create different kinds of materials, different kinds of things we eat, genetically modified foods. We could also do it for materials, like the wood here could be super strong wood because a bunch of ways you can manipulate that genetically. We know how to do all kinds of stuff. And so we're on the verge of essentially a biological age of production. Which is just starting to take off. It's early stages here. But let me give you an example of how this works. So for example, packaging, which is, we now know that we can actually create bottles that are biologically created because we know how to manipulate the biological engineering of these things so that they will biodegrade when they are put in salt water. And because the saline of the salt basically kind of will dissolve the things over 2 weeks and boom, it's gone. Or you can, if it's exposed to UV light of the sunlight after 2 weeks, if it's been thrown off somebody throws it out the car window into the kind of side of the road, in 2 weeks of UV sunlight, it'll kind of biodegrade, and you basically it's not there. It's not trash. It's not the same thing. So now this isn't like readily available. You can run in and get your Coke bottle like that right now. But what I'm saying is, like, we're on the verge here of a different kind of production that is essentially the way nature's been doing it for 4 billion years. It's perfected it in awesome ways. And what does nature do? It doesn't have any waste. Everything that's a waste of nature biodegrades into fuel for the next thing to kind of grow. And it's like we're in that game now. We know how, we're learning how that works. We know how to manipulate it. We can do it to do what we want it to do. Again, it's not immediately apparent right now, but in the next 10, 20, 30 years, and certainly through this century, we're going to get extremely good at that. So what I would say, when you say about circular economy, the ultimate circular economy is we produce what we need the way biology does it, the way nature does it, which is biologically. And we know how to do that now. The science is there. There's a lot of pieces we don't know, and we're still trying to learn. But in your lifetime, because you just told me you were born there in the 90s. You will absolutely, that'll be the main way you're going to get things around you. And your clothes will be like that. The houses are wood. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is biological now, but it's going to be super sustainable, super kind of fire resistant, stronger, a bunch of stuff. And there's a bunch of examples of this I can already tell you, but I just want to say it's a mental shift. It's a little beyond the practical, like, oh, today that's how I want to live my life. But it's opening up. And so the ultimate circular economy is really essentially a world of synthetic biology. And we're going to get there. And it's going to be a very workable world, certainly in the next 25 years. And then after that, it'll be the main way you do stuff, I bet. Because again, remember, you're down about climate change, about carbon energy. What is plastic? Plastic is essentially a petrochemical. It's made from petrochemicals. It's the same freaking thing. It's like the scourge of all these, bottles and oceans and, everything where we go. We got these golf ball bottles. It takes 1,000 years to biodegrade a fucking bottle, right? I mean, it's like, what if it took 2 weeks? And it's like, whoa, well, that would be a different animal. You wouldn't be so freaked out about that. Now, anyhow, so it's a little bit of a longer play, but it's something that you should at least stay open to and start tuning into, because it's going to be more and more real each year we go here.
Yeah, no, I think that's something I've definitely thought about a lot, is because obviously, there's a couple of things that you mentioned there I just want to comment on. Is like, first of all, you mentioned people talking about like, how do we reduce water bottles, for example, being used at all. But if you could completely shift it, then you've just wasted a whole bunch of effort, right? If you could just focus your effort on inventing something new that does, for example, degrade in 2 weeks, problem solved, put your energy somewhere else. As you talk about this kind of building everything from the ground up, it is very interesting to think about it from how are we going to use this, and can we engineer it from scratch, right? That's why I think this whole climate tech space is completely fascinating, because it won't just be, hey, what's the easiest way to make something, right? Like, what do we have around us? Obviously we came from survival to then trying to take whatever resource we could and make whatever out of it. Now we can make the resources exactly for what they need to be made for.
Exactly.
And this is something.
It takes a little leap of faith, because you say, do you want humans in there monkeying around with this genome? And that's an issue. And frankly, this could get shut down in ways that, for example, nuclear energy was one of those that got shut down by popular pushback that was frankly not rooted in a scientifically thorough way as it could have been. In other words, there was in my opinion, and there's a body of people, I don't know where exactly you fall or your listeners, but basically, nuclear energy, even as exists now, is not nearly as dangerous as it was made out to be around 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and a few of these things that have kind of thrown it off way. And it's getting the next generation, which is called fourth generation nuclear. It's actually safer and safer. They're smaller and smaller. There's a bunch of ways that you can do this very, much better, let alone fusion, which we should get to in a minute here. But basically, the reaction to that kind of screwed it up. Now, you could get a public reaction to synthetic biology, biological engineering, CRISPR, all this stuff, because people are going to say, holy shit, do we want to go down there, letting people monkey around with this thing that's taken 4 billion years to go? Or religious people will say, oh, God made it, their way, it's God's thing, and we don't want to monkey with it. So there is we got to navigate to get through to that place. But assuming that can be done, which I think it can be, it'll be a different kind of era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely something I've thought about too, is that, I come from a family of farmers, like all of my ancestry, and they complain about genetically modified items, food and corn specifically with Monsanto and some of the scandals there. But, I do think, generally speaking, there's so many applications where this is definitely better and much, much more required. We just need to go there. And this is something along the same topic I wanted to ask your opinion about, is something I've always been fascinated by in business world of climate tech, is not the software aspects of things, not the, easily scalable things. It's the hard things like manufacturing. And with this kind of as a topic, what are your opinions on whether or not manufacturing will even really be at all similar to what it is right now? Because obviously, I think there's a lot of effort being put in to try to make quote unquote sustainable materials to create the same things that we do in a sustainable way. But if things go the route you're talking about, you're essentially removing the entire need for that, because you can just skip a step. and go straight to creating the material. So do you have any opinions on that, and maybe timing?
I would say one of the things I've learned over the years, again, looking at the big trends of different new technologies and how they kind of grow out of old technologies, is one of the things that is true is you rarely get the old technologies rarely completely go away, right? There's always so the idea that in fact there will be carbon. We're going to need carbon energy things for a variety of things for decades more, even if clean energy gets super cheap. There'll be different things you need. We probably won't be able to scale off of plastics to the level as fast as we want, so we're going to have to keep that going for a while. The circular economy of retooling, how do we reuse things and the parts break apart and use them again and maintain them differently? All those are good things because it's going to take a while to kind of keep that world going. But what will happen this is the way it would normally happen is as one throttles down, more and more, you're going to see this other thing take it up. But even so, in the end, you're still going to have, people still have their vinyl records. People still, it's like, it's just not, the old stuff never kind of goes away totally.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyhow, there's that. And then also, I do think there is something, one of the great mentors of mine is a guy named Stuart Brand. He's writing his next book, his final book, is probably because he's in his 80s now, but it's on maintenance. It's called The Maintenance of Everything. It's kind of the Uber hit on the circular economy, but his point is, if you look on the long-term vision of the book is literally The Maintenance of Everything. And he's trying to say that basically what humans have to get a lot better at is maintaining everything. And that's essentially the ultimate way to think of a circular economy, is like, we need to basically build things so that we know what to keep them going for as long as possible without having to throw them away and try a new thing. But also biodegrade them and different things. He's also very biological, and he's really into that whole thing. So anyhow, that's another topic for another time. One thing I do want to say, because you do clean energy here, I would just say this idea of, I just want to bring up this fusion thing. I've alluded to it a couple of times, and I don't know how much time we got here, but I think it's important to do this, which is, I was at a party here, kind of a backyard party here about a few months ago in the spring in San Francisco. And in a little circle of people around me, there were literally 3 different founders or senior people of startups in fusion energy, and one VC who's just specializes in fusion energy. Fusion, just for those in terms of just to be clear to everybody in the audience, is like nuclear fission is you kind of break down an atom and it releases energy, and we capture that energy. That's what we've been doing since dropping the atom bomb and building the nuclear industry up until now. Nuclear fusion is where you pressurize, through using energy, you pressurize different atoms to kind of fuse, and that releases way more energy than essentially breaking it down. And it's basically what the sun does. All stars essentially create energy. That's how they create their energy, and it is ultimately the best way to go. And it creates an insane amount of energy around, and it has no waste. And it has all kinds of the negative things about fission, nuclear fission, you don't have. Now, it's been a kind of pipe dream for like 30 years. It's always 30 years away. We're always trying to do it. We've been trying to figure this out, through the middle of the 20th century, right? And it's always been this dream that, oh my God, if we only did this. But what's interesting is, like, there's a bunch of startups now that are seriously into this. They got serious VC money. And in talking to those people, I'll just say, they think the holy grail of that is the energy you put in, you have to get more energy out, or it doesn't make sense. If you got to put all this energy in and you only get half the energy out, well, that's not going to work. But if you put all this energy in and you get 10 times as much energy out, then that's a great energy source, right? And so they are getting close. These experiments are getting very close. I don't know if some of you might have been listening or tracking this, but we're getting almost to the point of we're getting as much energy out as in. And that's at least the threshold you got to get to. And then the question is, after that, could you get great quantities of energy out of it? And these folks think that within the next 10 years, we're going to crack that threshold. And they think already within 20 years, we'll be commercializing it, meaning these will be feasible ways to create energy. Super cheap, super clean, super energy that is essentially the kind of energy that could, work for centuries at some level. once humans figure out how to do that. So the one thing that's just a kind of a mind blower at some level is, as much as we're all sitting here with solar cells and we're all trying to figure out all these ways, the actual thing is, if that thing breaks through this even century, from the long-term perspective of humans, that is a game changer in a super way. And it's then you get super abundant energy, and it's cheap, abundant energy. So the goal of everybody should be cheap, abundant energy. Because once you get cheap, abundant energy, you can do all kinds of stuff. Like, for example, my solar stuff on the roof is cheap. It's free. It's free energy. So I'm not worried about turning my lights off. I'm not worried about keeping stuff on all day. It's like, it doesn't matter, because it's not wasting anything. It's not polluting anything. It's just, whatever. It's on because it's just the sun. It's going to keep coming. And when you get into energy abundance like that, it changes your whole perspective on what you do. And so all human history has been driven by energy sources. And if we cross this threshold, we are in super abundant, cheap energy. That is the holy grail of energy. And it might not happen, again, think of it as be 25 years to kind of really use it, if then. But even so, your lifetime, you're going to see that. And I think, it's possible we'll never get to it, but my gut feeling, and talking to these people that have got serious money and serious time and serious science in the game, we're getting close to that whole thing, and that would be amazing. And so then you're clean. And you should, for sure, on this podcast, see if you can get somebody on fusion. Maybe you have, I don't know, but I would say that is an exciting place to be. It's not immediate. The only thing is, you got to be patient with that one, because it's going to probably take a decade or two.
Yeah, fair enough. I've had somebody who mentioned it in kind of brief at one point as well. So I think definitely would be worth maybe sharing some context for me to chat with them. Be glad to have them on. I do want to try to get through this. I know we're running out of time, but I do want to try to get through some topics I think are quite important still. One of them being on the consumer side of things. What are the major trends that people are driving? We talked a little bit about the generational changes and everything to push corporations, for example, to make these changes. Because obviously, you talk about the big effects from a government making commitments, which kind of then drives more money into it because there's serious intention behind it, and they know that there's going to be a future for it. But then you kind of keep going down all the way to the consumer activity. And I think you could even bring in ESG to this, right? Of like people wanting to understand how sustainable and ethical their products that they're buying are. So what are some of the big trends happening here, and the future?
Well, let me just, we did touch on the generational thing, but really, let me unlock that a little bit differently for you, because that is the whole piece. So let me give you, when I do a lot of keynote talks, hour-long talks, where I lay out what's coming in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And one of the things I do almost every talk I do is I lay out the demographic numbers of what is the population of the United States right now by generation. And I line them up and I say, every year, how many people are in every category up for 100 years? Like, so there's a handful of 100-year-olds, not many, right? But, there's 31-year-olds, there's 4 million of them. And then 2-year-olds, there's, 4.5 million. Anyhow, point is every one of these years has a category of how many people are in that bar chart, right? And the striking thing when you throw it out there, and I throw it out to all these audiences, it blows your mind away when you realize, holy shit, the baby boomers are literally sliding down. The numbers are just like literally sliding down like this, because they are literally dying off. Now, the front of the baby boom, is well into their 70s right now. And in fact, coming up on their late 70s, right? So, you see Joni Mitchell just did her thing at, whatever, the jazz thing. You look at these people, they're barely, making it around, right? I mean, and I'm not being mean about that. I'm just saying it's like they're could be 80 years old, right? So a lot of them are dying. A lot of them in the 70s are dying. And so there's just not enough of them. And then if you go to the back end boomers, which, boomers were like from 1945 after the war, 46 to 64. It was a long run there, the boom there. But the people born in 64 are still in their, they're just late 50s kind of, but in the next, this decade, they're all going to be retired. Technically, the retired meaning 65, or they're going to be dying off. So the point being is there's this whole massive generation that has just essentially fundamentally structured everything going on in the United States from 1980 to 2020. The last 40 years has just been a boomer drive, of just because they had the numbers, everything was around the boomers, right? From rock and roll to, the whole thing. And that's over, right? And they're dying off. And so, but when you look at those numbers, it's the millennial generation it's bigger than the baby boom ever was. It's because it's their kids plus immigrants. It's the biggest generation in American history. They're all from about age 41 now to, I don't know, 26 or something, where they are right about now. And then the Gen Zers are a little bit smaller than the millennials, but they're still about 26 to now, I don't know, down there in kind of early high school, kind of early. Anyhow, they're kind of coming of age kind of people, but those two generations are the future of America. And the reason I'm kind of laying this out, and by the way, the Gen Xers between the boomers and the millennials are kind of a smaller generation. It was a baby bust after 64. So they didn't have the same weight. They didn't change the culture. They didn't have the biggest numbers in politics. So anyhow, it's usually America is structured by the big demographic generations. The whole point of this is, because you're asking about consumer things, all the consumers that matter in the United States right now are millennials or Gen Zers. And, with a smattering of other people who are still buying their second home or maybe, whatever, going to retire and do something. But the point is, corporate America totally gets this. They're like, so when those generations say, you know what, Black Lives Matter, they're like, we're all into diversity, absolutely, totally. Black Lives Matter. We're down with it, right? And then the aging boomers who are kind of the conservative kind of people are screaming bloody murder. Like, what do you mean you're doing that? Like, why would you do that? It's like, well, because they understand that that's their workers, that's their consumers, that's the future, right? I mean, like, why are they listening to the people that are never going to buy another thing ever and they're going to soon be passed away? So they're basically, the consumer world has been, but it is still in motion of being fundamentally restructured from essentially a boomer-centric world of the last 40 years to a millennial and Gen Z-centric world of the next 40. And that everybody who matters in corporate America knows that. And so that thing is still working its way through the culture. And so it'll go to everything about that. Me Too, the whole thing. What happened? Why did Me Too happen when it happened? It happened when the millennials kind of came into the workforce and said, what the fuck? I'm not going to be treated like this, in my workforce. And boom, 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 boom. All those boomers came tumbling down like in the space of 2 or 3 years. And now it's like just the way corporate America works. Climate change, everyone's kind of been, there's been this structure around climate change. There's been a total war for 40 years of like climate deniers, kind of all that kind of stuff. Millennials and Gen Z, there's no question in their head. They don't even like doubt for a minute there's not climate change. And so corporate America, what are they doing? They're all about green everything. They're all about climate change. They're all committing to all these things, the ESG, all this stuff. It's happening. So you want to talk about that? So as much as, yes, we talked about generation, but you really got to get what's really going on with generations. The generational change going on in America right now is fundamental. By the way, it's happening in Europe, happening all over the world. Basically, the world itself is really millennial and under. In fact, it's really the vast majority of people on the entire planet right now are under age 40. And so that's the generation that matter going forward. That's the generation that people are going to buy and sell and all kinds of stuff. And so that is the recognition that's only fully kind of working its way through. By the way, the next thing that's happening around this is politics. Politics doesn't move as fast as commerce. So commerce moves fast and all the companies are like, damn, we're with it. Yeah, diversity, we're down with it. And now what you're saying, among other things, there's a million other ways to parse out what those generations want, but I'm just using that as a great example. But now it's happening in politics. And so what you're watching happen, I mean, literally 10 years ago, there's no working way you would have gotten anything around climate through the Congress. We couldn't even, there was like 190 climate deniers, in the Congress just 5 years ago, all of them in the Republican Party, by the way. But basically, but now, you're getting big shifts happening, all kinds of stuff. And that's basically because power is shifting around this demographic thing. And it's just inexorably happening. It's not a magical thing. It's not like, oh, people change their minds. No, it's different people are now driving the cultural conversation, the commerce conversation, and the political conversation. And that is only going to increase every year for the next 10, 20, 30 years. it's a different era, and that is the way people really have to wrap their head around what's going on here. And so that's why, if you're going to bet around which direction is the country going to go right now, and by the way, let's say the last thing about this, that those generations are rooted in what's blue America: cities, coastal cities. Even in the red states, they're in the cities. It's a young, diverse, urban, knowledge worker, professional, highly educated coalition of people who believe in climate change, want to do a ton about it, understand the diversity of the country is a good thing. We want to embrace it. We want social equity. We want racial equity. We want, all this kind of stuff. And, you personally might not believe that, whoever's listening to this, but it doesn't matter because because the numbers are just so big and they're growing that it's where the country's going to go. Now, you can be in denial about it and think, oh, I hope it doesn't happen. But I'm thinking that's what's happening. So when I talk about the future like this, and I talk about the senior execs, C-suites, CEOs, boards, I'm doing a big board retreat early next week. It's like I'm laying out these facts to people, and you know what? These are all usually older people who are in these controlling spots. They're listening now because they realize it's true, it's happening, and it's not about what they want; it's about what these generations want.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Obviously, you mentioned corporate America kind of following or looking at from a probably initially a selfish perspective of what's happening in the younger consumers, the consumers that are going to matter for them. It's interesting that relationship can actually drive a lot of this change, because then the money goes into it. Whereas like you look at a country that might be, more command driven from the top of telling people what to do, for example, China, and they might be a little bit more behind those things, right? So this is very interesting to me. And that actually, you touched on it a little bit, but this is another big question for me is, for the future of America, I think, for me, it feels as though there's a lack of kind of vision for where we're going, right? As there was probably a vision during certain dilemmas such as World War II, where we had something that we were kind of working towards. What are you seeing in terms of emerging leaders, or what are the important characteristics perhaps of future leaders of America? Because obviously a lot of the people in my generation are among those future leaders. So what are those things that are important for people to do, for people to have in mind when they're doing that? And, what are some of the trends coming there to actually create a vision for where we can go?
Well, it's a great question, and it's probably a good one towards the end. I mean, I'm happy to keep going on here too on it, because I can talk all day on this stuff. But here's what I would say is, for example, you used World War II. It's when you look back on an era, everything looks like it all made sense. Oh, America came together, won the war. Oh, FDR was the president, everyone loved him. Oh, Eisenhower was this great leader in the World War. Oh, afterwards they came together and built the world post-war boom. Oh, boom, boom, boom. And all the stuff you lay out. That's how it works when you look back in history. If you were in those periods, like if you were in the 1930s in America, it looked like a dystopic, crazy ass place. I mean, it was ups and downs. It was Great Depression. There were right-wing fascists kind of trying to be like emulating Hitler in the 30s here in the United States. I mean, everyone was calling, FDR a socialist and a communist, and it was never going to work. Anyhow, there was a total mosh pit of craziness going on, and people were wholly depressed. They had no idea. They dragged their heels getting into, the war. They didn't want to go to Europe. Anyhow, it's like, I'm just kind of overemphasize this, but the point is, like, you look back and say, oh, the leaders there led them through. No, it was a kind of a mess, and because that's what the present looks like all the time, right? So I would say that's kind of we're kind of in now, right? And we're kind of in this, I would call this, I would say America right now is very much like what the 1930s were, and even like what the 1850s were before the Civil War. I mean, it was essentially a time of fundamental system change of the economy. In the Civil War, it was between we were going to have a slave agrarian state or a kind of a free labor kind of manufacturing state. That's literally what it's about. I mean, it's some fundamental level. And in the 30s, it was really a fundamental thing about whether we were going to go into kind of a kind of right-wing nationalism, which is what happened in Europe with the fascist states. We literally were in that game. There were clearly that was one of the main ways out people were thinking in the U.S. Or whether we were going to do something more of a democratic, socialisty, but welfare statey kind of way forward, which eventually prevailed. And anyhow, but in the 30s, it was not clear where it was going to go. But boom, once it happened, it all started to flow. I'm arguing that America, the last 10 years, has been in that interregnum. We're in between two eras. We're watching, the stakes are extremely high, even just around energy. Like, just think about it this way. There is a big part of mostly red America, highly rooted in the carbon energy. I mean, highly. Texas, North Dakota, coal and, West Virginia, Kentucky, blah, blah. You can lay it out. That's red America. Totally into essentially. Now there's smatterings of kind of, clean energy in there too, but I'm just saying that's one way. And then blue America is better positioned for taking advantage of the clean energy, blah, 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 all the stuff that's happening. And so and there's other divisions in the country for sure, but that alone is a huge high stakes battle, right? And so it's going to be tough, vicious, angry, paranoid, which is what's kind of happened. So, but what I'm saying is, I believe we're moving through that now into the next era. If I had to point out to you where I think it's going, which is somewhat controversial, and I've done this on other podcasts or more political podcasts, I would say I would look towards what has happened in California in the last 20 years. California was a red state. Originally, that's the home around Reagan and that whole kind of tax cutting world. It was also then a state that was a 50-50 state, didn't get anything done from the 90s through kind of early part of the 2000s. It was literally a basket case. Nothing could get done. And the last 15 years has been a kind of a very blue state. Now everyone looks at it saying, oh, it's this crazy progressive place. Yeah, well, it evolved to that. And what I would just say, it's because it confronted the 21st century early, climate change early, diversity of the country early. It's kind of become it's like an early version of America testing out what the 21st century is like. So with that in mind, I would say one person I'd be looking at as a really interesting model would be a guy like Gavin Newsom, the governor here, understands technology, totally gets the clean tech thing, really big on the climate change stuff, embracing the diversity of the country, young, dynamic. His family's like right out of a storybook. 4 beautiful kids, is like Kennedy kind of guy. Anyhow, the point is, you could, if you really just want to say, there's nobody around, like, there's a good guy that's around, and he's running a state that's 40 million people. It's the 5th largest economy in the world. It's got all the major tech companies that are running the world, $1 trillion companies. It's got all the great media companies that are basically putting the world out, talking to the world through Hollywood and stuff like that. California plays way above its weight. It has global influence, and it has American influence. And I would argue it's always a future of America. It's basically the prototype of what America is eventually going to become. So when people sit here and wring their hands and say, oh, we don't know what's going to happen, and it's Biden is not going to, he's not the guy who's going to ring it in. He's not the guy, Trump. I mean, that's nutty to think Trump's the future. But I would say, if you really had to get concrete and start saying, well, what is a reasonable way the country could go? I think it's take a hard look at California. It's got its problems. It hasn't solved every problem. It's got housing prices are huge. We got too many homeless. I mean, it's not saying it's perfect. It's just saying it's more aligned with the future. It's actually got, it's got a lot of what's coming. And so I would say, and it's not just Gavin, there's a whole slate of people below that you should start thinking about. I mean, it's not, anyhow, I'm just saying, it's like, keep an eye open for that generation. Now, will it drop all the way down? There are people who are your generation, or maybe your generation might be Gen Z, but anyhow, there is a next generation that's coming. I would argue that this decade is the transition of leadership. And, Biden, I don't even think he's going to run the next time. So Pelosi's at her last legs, Mitch McConnell, all those people are in their late 70s, 80s. That's what I mean. That's the end of the boomer era. That's the people that have been at it for 40 years. They are not elitists in the next thing. They're hanging on, and they're kind of transitioning, and they're the bridge. I like that framing. They're a bridge to the next thing. They're not going to lead the next thing, but look to that next generation. And one way to start, without, we don't have all day here to point out other people, but just, there is alternatives. And I would say keep an eye on Gavin. That's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, I do think it is interesting. And I don't mind talking about politics a little bit here, because obviously it plays a big role in regulatory affairs and things like that. So I appreciate this. Obviously, we've gone a bit over. there's many more questions we could go through, but we'll pause it there. Any just kind of final things you want to wrap up with?
Well, I love what you're doing with this podcast. I think you're totally on it. We were given the big picture here, but we could drill down almost every category of clean energy. Because again, the North Star has said, okay, we're off of carbon. Carbon, there'll be carbon around it for decades, at some level. But I'm just saying the North Star has gone out, the new North Star. We're reorienting the entire energy environment around non-carbon, let's put it that way. That thing is going to be a complete boom for literally the next 25, 30 years. And it's all the above. Like we didn't touch on hydrogen. Like I got friends who have been talking about hydrogen. We thought it was going to be the main way to get off of carbon back in the 90s. That didn't turn out to be true because history has a way of kind of working its way through. But that said, hydrogen is going to play a role here. And a lot of this hydrogen is now making a comeback. There's going to be geothermal stuff starting. There's some really fascinating things about really deep down kind of drilling that could actually bring, energy up, not having to be around some, hot springs that's already there. Anyhow, you could just throw out a bunch of examples, but that's the beautiful thing about a free market economy, is you send out new signals and you get people, capital and different kinds of ideas and entrepreneurs and stuff, and stuff happens, and it's going to happen. Now, that says you need a good, strong government. You need kind of directed public resources. I'm not, one of these total free market libertarians. Far from it. We need kind of strategic thinking, particularly when we got to kind of drive through this climate crisis. Just like in World War II, by the way. I mean, one of the reasons World War II, the power of government was enhanced because you had a world warrior fighting on two fronts, but also in terms of the U.S., I'm thinking. But it's the same thing around climate change. Climate change is going to essentially re-empower the role of government in general, federal government, but even state government, but also global kind of institutions, because it's going to you can't just, the last 40 years, we were kind of this free open society, free open markets, we're going to solve it. And, it didn't solve it. It basically ended up getting worse and worse. And so what we need to do now is we need more directed kind of thing, and that's happening. And so the structural thing that's going to happen, our governments are going to be hopefully reinvigorated and reinvented and got more efficient and, less bureaucratic and more efficient. All kinds of things that are positive about it too. But in general, what it's going to do is help drive the alignment of all these pieces that's going to take to pull off what we need to pull off in basically by 2050, which is a pretty monumental human historical challenge, where we will literally, we were going to do something that literally humans will look back on for centuries to come. They're going to look back and say, holy shit, what did those humans do in that first half of the 21st century? Well, this is why the bigger story is we went digital. That is a crazy ass thing that's connected up all humans on the planet. That's world historical. We went sustainable. We're going to get into all clean energies and basically, I would say, biological production, which is going to be kind of a sustainable production. And we're going to go increasingly global, in which coordinating on a planetary scale. That thing, humans are going to do once, but all intelligent species, if you think like I do, that there's other intelligent life in the planet or in the universe, basically at some point, an intelligent species is going to have to hit those three thresholds to actually last for the long haul. And so if humans last for another 1,000 years, they're going to look back and say, that's when our humans did that in this 50-year period here. You're lucky to be alive. Anyone who's listening, you should be thinking, thank your stars that you are living in an amazing time of human history, and ton of opportunities too, just individually, but also collectively. It's an amazing time to be alive. So I will leave you with that, and I think that's a good place to stop. But thanks for having me on the show, and we'll maybe talk another time.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Please, of course, let us know what you thought of the show. Share this with somebody who might find it interesting. In particular, people who like to think about the future and the possibilities. This could be a good conversation starter. You can also, of course, follow Peter on Twitter. Follow him on Medium to follow his writings as well. I highly recommend following these. And then if you're interested in picking up his book that he has in the past written, but there's another one coming up soon, if I'm not mistaken. Keep an eye out for that. And if you are joining us for the first time, please do subscribe and turn on notifications, as we really appreciate you leave us a review. It's very, very helpful to grow the audience. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor and want to collaborate in some way, please do consider reaching out. My email can be found in the description. And then if you are interested, feel free to join our Slack channel where you can connect with other professionals or follow our LinkedIn page for other content posted kind of throughout the month. Just a quick note on our next episode, it will be with Ben Parvey of OmGrid. This is a company helping residential customers, residential energy users become independent off of the grid. And I just think it's quite interesting, this episode that's coming up, because it used to seem very, very silly for people several years ago to want to go independent from the grid entirely. But currently there's a lot of reasons why people are considering it, and just a very interesting finance model that basically makes it very, very seamless. So I think a very interesting episode coming up with Ben. Tune in for that next time. Thank you very much. See you next time on CleanTechies the Podcast.